Welcome back. Once again, I'm John Conley with the Ohio Board of Regents, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker. Sebastian Thrun is the CEO of Udacity. This is a startup focused on democratizing higher education. Some of you may recognize him from his work as a Google Fellow, as a researcher at Stanford. He's widely known for his work on Google X, home of the Google self-driving car, and was elected to the National Academy of Engineering at the age of 39. He has started and sold 2 companies after winning the DARPA Grand Challenge, a historical robot race. Fast Magazine has named him the 5th smartest person in business. He's on Vanity Fair's list of new establishment. His inventions have been featured as the best 50 inventions by Time Magazine. So without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Sebastian Thrun.
It's great to be here. It's great to be in Ohio, close to my home state of Pennsylvania for many years. And it's great to have Andrew Ng from Coursera in the audience, a close friend and colleague at Stanford. As you can tell from the theme of the keynotes today, there has been a certain amount of change and innovation in the space of higher education, partially led by MIT, by 30 other universities, and Stanford University. So I'm here to tell you is how I got involved in this, what we're doing, and where I see the challenges going ahead. But up front, it's an exciting time to be in higher education. We're finally able to marry technology and education in new ways, and marry research and education in totally new ways, which I'm sure Andrew talked about this morning, and I'd like to amplify as well. So let me give you the story of my last 18 months. And let me start with a poster that I just observed that someone sent to me, which has brought many people together talking about MOOCs, massive open online classes. This was actually sent to me by the California Faculty Association, which is a union in California. And I looked at this and realized that our president at Stanford, John Hennessy, is quoted, who said MOOCs are a tsunami. And that quote put many people into fear, because we all know that there's things in higher education that aren't quite right, and we're all striving for better solutions. So I found this ironical that I made it into a poster. It's my claim to fame. So let me tell you my story and begin the very beginnings, a little less than 2 years ago, when I attended a conference called TED. TED is an annual event in Long Beach, frequented by the Bill Clintons of the world. And in that conference, a young investment banker spoke about his educational work. His name was Salman Khan. I'm sure all of you know him. Raise your hand if you don't know him. Thank you. Or if you've fallen asleep already, either of the two. And Salman, being, I guess, an assistant hedge fund analyst of sorts, had decided to record himself because he was training his nieces to learn about math. And while most of the mentoring took place one-on-one, at some point he had to travel, so he made YouTube videos, just to find out that his nieces preferred him on video over him in person. Those YouTube videos, of which there are more than 3,000 at this point, and many other things on this wonderful, wonderful website, went viral. And I was sitting in the audience just like you, thinking, wow, I'm a Stanford professor. At the time I was a fully tenured professor. And I teach my 200 students, 400 students every year. And here's someone who teaches tens of millions of students by video. So I was basically jealous and said, I have to do the same. So I went back home and talked to my co-instructor, Peter Norvig, and decided to take a Stanford graduate level class online on artificial intelligence, which is my subject area of research. And we sent exactly one email. And that email is given here in its full entirety. And I'm putting it on here because this is my entire marketing effort for my class. And I'm going to cut down a little bit on the text and focus on basically one sentence. It said my course would be available free online for anybody to enroll. And students are graded the same way as Stanford students, so you can compare yourself. Now, at that time, MIT OpenCourseWare celebrated about its 10th anniversary and had more than, I think, 100 million students at the time. So the idea of going online was nothing new. But the idea of making a course that actually has the same kind of exams certainly raised people's appetite and made them sign up. Now, Peter and I took bets how many students would sign up. And he said a few hundred, and I said 10,000, because I'm an optimist. This was Friday afternoon, sometime in July, 2 years ago. Next morning, 5,000 had signed up, and the tweets were coming in, 5,400, 5,500. Sunday morning, 10,000, and Monday morning, when Stanford finally understood what's going on, we had 14,000 students sign up. So quite a number, about as many students as Stanford has students. And then we had a number of meetings that Andrew was heavily involved in and others to really figure out what to do with this and how to make sure that it's proper and the certificates we issue are not confused with Stanford credit. And Andrew, of course, at the time also launched his class, and so did Jennifer Whittam at Stanford. These were kind of the beginnings of the Stanford MOOC movement as it emerged about a year and a half ago. Now, Peter and I, he's my co-instructor, Peter, he's a Google director, struggled to put our materials together. And we literally, in our basement, used a napkin and a pen and a little camera that my wife had given me for my birthday the year before, recorded those, and took these videos into YouTube. But the one thing we did differently that we really cared about greatly is we always felt that most lectures are actually relatively boring. No offense taken myself. But online, they're even worse. So online, you're competing with Facebook and Twitter and so on. So the one thing that I cared about exploring at the time was really to ask the question, can we be better than just kind of collecting the Stanford experience on tape? And the answer for us at the time and to the present date has been, yes, we can, at least so we believe. And we do this by not recording the lectures, but by recording the exercises and the homework assignments. Now, homework assignments and exercises alone are probably insufficient. So we have to do some explaining around those. But the basic experience was not one where the student passively watches television and looks at lectures, but actively solves problems. And we did this with the entire class. Obviously, this was the worst class we ever taught.
The next concept I'd like to teach you is called de-separation.
And the video is not working.
Let me start
Interesting.
the discussion of this
sound is working, but not video.
We have here a Bayes network.
That does
and
make
I'm going to
sense.
ask,
Skip over
the
this.
next concept I'd like to...
So videos played an essential role and to do the present day. They're very short. They're often only sometimes 10 seconds, sometimes 2 minutes. But they always led to a question. And this question here is a quiz that in AI is actually a fairly involved mathematical kind of theorem you have to prove to yourself. Those of you who haven't taken my class have probably zero clue what this means. They're just random characters, T upside down. But the interesting thing that we put together at the time was a mashup over YouTube that would allow us to stop the video and make it interactive. And interactivity came in the way of little push-button choices or numerical choices. And later on, we added program code that people could check mark things. And then the computer would come back and give you some feedback, like what you've done right and what you've done wrong. Initially, we gave people exactly one chance. That's the way I'd learned to teach at Stanford. It's called the hard-ass method. Andrew was smarter than me. In his class, he gave multiple runs. And then after a number of flaming emails, we changed it, which I'll tell you about. But this one class, more than any other class, I think, really inspired a huge number of people. We got about 2,000 volunteers, 1,950 people offering translation services free of charge. An artist in France created a counter class called Introduction to Artistic Intelligence as opposed to Artificial Intelligence. Hundreds and hundreds of local meetups convened. Several universities in Europe spontaneously accepted it for credit, even without even checking what's in the class. And it became this mass movement with 160,000 students sign up in total. It's not the largest class today. It's been larger classes. Our record right now internally is 250. But it was large by any measure you could imagine. So we could go back to Stanford's president and say, we have more students in the state of Lithuania than you have students. Now, these weren't all students in the Stanford sense, and I'll give you some testimonies in a second. But these were people, I mean, some of them were members of the media, some of them heard about it by Facebook, signed up, never came back. In fact, about half of them never showed up in class. But some of them were very, very serious. And in the end, 23,000 made it all the way to final graduation day in this class at Stanford level performance. Now, the thing that changed my life was actually not the numbers. I know people have talked about the numbers a lot. And these numbers come with aspirations and they come with fears. They come with the aspiration that there might be a way to bring free education to the world. And of course, Coursera, edX, and ourselves and others have really tried to build on this promise. But they also come with the concern. If a Stanford professor can teach more students artificial intelligence than all other professors in the world combined, why do we need these other professors? For me, the numbers are secondary. For me, much more primary is the pedagogy and the experience that the students have. So this is an email from Afghanistan that came in along the way. Thanks for the work with AI class. I'm going to highlight a few sentences here. I'm completing the course from remote areas of Afghanistan and often don't have great internet connectivity or electricity or internet connections that don't block YouTube. I spent the last few days under incoming mortar and rocket attacks, then dodging checkpoints under questionable legal status to exfiltrate a war zone to a third world airfield until things settled down. I had about an hour of fairly solid internet connectivity to be able to get the assignments done and still managed a respectable score. Now, if you think about this, this is not your typical Stanford student. In fact, if you're in education, it's probably not your typical student, period. But it's an inspiring young man fighting for us in Afghanistan, putting his life on the line, and now spending nights and risking more dangers to build up a future past his days as a soldier. And it's very moving. If I look at the delta I make in this gentleman's life by bringing artificial intelligence to the battlefield of Afghanistan compared to the typical Stanford students, I'd say this one student alone is worth putting the class online. And there was one of tens of thousands of emails I received, not just one. In fact, if you sent me one, I know that some of the people in the audience took in class with us, I probably didn't read it because I can't read tens of thousands of personal email. But every time I go in and look at the stream of emails, I find some that are amazingly moving and really sometimes make me cry. This is a lady, Sabrina Green, who is a single mother of two, and reports at long detail to me the family difficulties she's going through as she's trying to raise her children and dealing with the various financial disasters and so on, and illnesses. And she's one of the people that I reminded at some point and say, look, your homework assignment behind. You keep up the pace, please. And she got a personal email from me and responded in a personal way, as did 40,000 other students. And we lays out that she suffered great chaotic difficulties, the job has been threatened by the economic climate, and all these wonderful things, or horrible things, sorry. Baby has been sick, family member suddenly sick. And then she says, well, I've given up. Let's see, where is it? On November 13th, I gave up. I told myself it was ridiculous to think I could justify continuing this class, taking all the time, giving all the other problems that surrounded me. And this is a person who's never done computer science, taking a graduate level Stanford class. And then that Monday morning, I checked my email and I saw the note you sent Saturday, and I stared at it for a while. And then I sighed and told myself, I can't quit now. I took the midterm this weekend, mostly while holding a teething infant. None of my other issues have gone away, but I feel more determined than ever to see this through for myself because I want to, because it makes me feel good. I can't tell you how much these emails affected me and affect me to the present day. There's so many single parents struggling getting by, so many people taking time off their career and trying to get back into a work life after they raise their children or in the middle of raising their children. And so few of us ever receive this positive kickback and say, yes, you can do it. I felt there's an entire educational dimension where we can just make that happen and assist those people and be there for those people. Now, I spare you the other few thousand emails that I read. But here's one that also moved me because it really relates to the experience being in this class. This class, ridiculed by some other educators, I should say, made a point about giving people problems, having them solve it, and tell them, well done. In fact, one educator felt an educator should never be as positive and applaud their students as much as I did in my class. But I felt good about it. I felt like you have to go to people and say, well done, right? This is good, right? This is a question you answered correctly. The thing that kind of struck me about this email and many others in the same tone is the intimacy that this specific experience gave him. An intimacy with me and with like tens of thousands of other peer students that he and she interacted with online. And the reason why it moved me is because I always felt that the intimacy is lost if you go to a large forum, right? So this is more people than fit in the world's greatest stadium. And how can you be intimate as an instructor, picturing yourself in a stadium full of people? But the truth is, the medium is actually very intimate, the same way movies are intimate, and can be very, very intimate experiences. Because it doesn't bother you that you're sitting in the same room with other people. You're not constrained in the same way. Those people don't constrain your experience. They don't constrain the speed at which you go forward. They don't constrain your ability to think. So having 160,000 people in one room would be a negative experience because as an instructor, you'd be forced to go at the same speed. And lecturing is the best you can do. But here you could abandon all lectures and have them go at their own speed and be really close to them in some really magical, strange way. So here's a, oops, video if it plays. Looks like something happened to my laptop settings.
AI class for me.
That makes the videos not play. Let me see if I can play it this way. Because they all played before. Interesting. I guess we have to do without the videos. I'm not going to debug this right now. This one is not the most interesting one. It gets more interesting when I get to the website. And I'll show you what we're actually doing. Okay, so here's some startling statistics, and those were the ones that made it into Wired magazine and New York Times and other places. And I think those, along with the more recent, much larger numbers by edX, Coursera, and us at Udacity, are really kind of filling the news lines these days. And I'd love to move the focus a little bit away from those numbers. But at the time, we were really shocked. We had 160,000 students, 23,000 approximately graduated with the Stanford level performance. One trick that I played is that I gave the same exams to the Stanford students as I gave to the online students and the same homework assignments. So we can actually stack rank them. And the stack ranking was not too flattering. On average, the Stanford student does better, about one full letter grade. But the top 411 people were people online. And they beat every single Stanford student. And that suggests in the world of willing students, there are some that we never admit into Stanford that we should be admitting. We just don't find them. 44 languages, cost was under $1 a student, including all technology. And another interesting observation was, I was teaching the same class as a lecture class at Stanford at the same time. And of the 200 students that were in the class, within weeks, only 30 would show up. And 170 gave me the same Salman Khan effect that Salman Khan had reported at TED. They preferred me on tape. And they were religiously watching all these videos and taking those quizzes. The performance of the average Stanford student went up a full letter grade in the midterm and final exam compared to previous years by them having exposure to this medium. And what that really means is, while I might believe my lectures are very effective, they're actually not. When I have this classical, guys, you got this, girls, you got this, and they all nod, that is not a verification that they actually learned it. And in most cases, they fool themselves as well into having learned it and not having learned it. So when the video stops and says, you can't go on until you solve this damn problem over here, that's a better way to force them. And it's actually interesting how much I, as an instructor, and the students themselves misjudge what they've learned. I can go to them and say, do you want more exercises? And everyone says, no, no, we got this, professor. And I put this in the midterm, and they didn't. Most of them didn't. In this medium, it's unforgiving. So you will know if you don't get it, because it will tell you individual, as if you had an individual mentor. So moving on, we started a company called Udacity. Udacity has about 20 plus courses online at this point. We have about 1 million or so students. And we're trying to innovate radically on the pedagogy side. That's our mission, more than anything else. We are questioning some of the very basics of most of higher ed. Most of higher ed, including online higher ed, is based on the principle of synchronicity. Now, that principle was invented before the book was invented, at a time when the most economical form to disseminate information was for a person, a preacher, a professor, to address his audience and disseminate the information using sound, and having the brains of the audience absorb the sound in real time and process and memorize it for later use. That was the best technology we had about 1,000 years ago, obviously outpaced by Google and many others today. Now, we invented the book, and the book had a profound impact on education, but the predominant mode of in-class education remained the same, and it remained driven by synchronicity, by a fixed stream. Now, when you go synchronous, a very logical consequence is people do learn at different paces. And even people that you pool very carefully to be the same demographics and knowledge state and age group as most colleges do, they still learn differently. Because you know what? One might have a hangover, the second might be more mathematical versus, okay, thank you, apparently. Some had a good night here in Ohio yesterday. Some are just distracted for a moment. Some need extra exercise. We don't know that there's visual learners, there's auditory learners, there's different style of learning. So that mandates, if you want to make the learning experience as good as possible, keep your classroom small, because it gives you more flexibility as an instructor to adapt to the needs of specific students. That's why we want small classrooms. You see no other reason why we want small classrooms. If everybody like a machine learned exactly the same way, the stadium experience would just be fine. And I could teach 160,000 students synchronously. But the reason why this doesn't work is because people have to go at their own pace. And that is not my insight. This has been known in educational circles for decades, and Salman Khan certainly makes this point publicly very loudly and very clearly. Now, I'm sure Andrew showed the same slide this morning. It's called the Two Sigma Effect by Benjamin Bloom. And he researched 20 years ago that the best mode of education is actually individual tutoring. And why is that? Well, tutor has the chance, the opportunity to really go one-on-one at your speed and challenge you. So what we're basically doing is we don't lecture, we tutor in our medium. And we aspire to be 2 sigma better than any student would get in a regular lecture class. I can't promise you we are. We have some good data that suggests we have a chance. But the opportunity exists to use this medium as an individual medium. I want to contrast this to a lot of work I've seen in online learning. Online learning is 20 plus years old, 30 years old. Correspondence learning is centuries old, turns out. It's not a new concept. Of course, correspondence, learning by mail and so on is not synchronous. And certainly is asynchronous. So these are not completely new ideas. But a lot of tools I've seen come up in the learning sphere are based on synchronicity and therefore bound to small classrooms. And a lot of work that I've seen, classes you can take from the best providers online, mimic the classroom. And I want to challenge this because if we just mimic the classroom, we never go beyond the classroom. We put ourselves into constraints. That means the online experience necessarily must be worse than the actual in-classroom experience. But there's many industries that started out mimicking a previous industry with a new medium and then moved away from it. And I'll give you a few examples. Classically would be movies. The early full-featured movies were literally recordings of stage play with little curtains going up. And then, of course, movies today are fundamentally different. We invented cinematography, something you could never do on stage. They really diverged. And I would argue, I mean, you can argue whether theater is better or movies are better. In some level, movies have clearly excelled way beyond the theater experience. And certainly they have made this medium accessible to a much larger number of audience members. Another one is radio and television. Those of you old enough to remember early television. When I grew up, the newscaster would basically be a radio reporter with a script in front of them and flipping the pages. And there was the television. But basically, early television was just a way to record a radio reporter. And of course, television today now is completely different. Even newscasts is done much, much differently, and it continues to evolve. Now, the problem with this model of small classes is manifest in the explosion of higher education costs, or education costs in general. Tuition fees have gone up for the last 30 years, as you all know, at a rate of 7%, 7.45% annually, and has outpaced the cost explosion in other sectors like housing and health sector and so on. So it's actually quite problematic. Now, these developments, of course, have been much discussed in the media. I'm sure you've been subject to those left and right yourself. And they lead to all kinds of news articles. There was just one this week. This is slightly older. This is not about Nazi death camps. It's really about, is college a lousy investment? Have we reached the inflection point where the investment into college is not worth it anymore? And it's a very thorny question to ask. Obviously, this inflection point will be upon us at some point because we can't endure. At this point, we have more than $1 trillion college debt in the United States. Has this point been reached, and can we find new ways out? Now, Time magazine, that also looked at this in October, took a different slant. The writer, Amanda Ripley, actually took a few MOOCs and reported on those. And I quote a little bit later. But Time magazine, in its cover on the same topic, you can see one professor, 160,000 students, which is not quite correct. We have actually two professors. And this specific one was just before Election Day, so both Barack and Mitt Romney had a little one-pager in there on the topic. Really try to find the constructive way out and say, is there technologies that can help us? And this coincides, of course, with this big movement that you've all heard about. In fact, Thomas Friedman, whom Daphne and I and others saw in Davos at a panel 2 weeks ago, called this the biggest revolution of our times, what's going on right now in this space. And I actually believe that's the case, even though I don't quite know what the outcome is going to be. This girl next to him is an 11-year-old Pakistani girl that took one of our classes and was reported in Time magazine. And it showed that you can actually reach people you'd never be able to reach with a Stanford level class in the world, a girl in Pakistan, age 11. Let me tell you something about Udacity today, where we're going and what we're aspiring to do, and then open the forum for questions. Udacity today is a for-profit company, just like Coursera, and we have not partnered with as many institutions. We are more petite in some sense. We're focusing more on STEM and computer science at this point. About 20 courses up. We have about 80,000 certificates issued. And we also help students find jobs. So we have a job placement program that's quite active going on. The numbers is slightly higher than depicted here. We do education, we do certification, we give credit with certain partners, we do job placement, and so on. Rather than giving you all the statistics, let me just dive in and see if at least my web browser works and explore the site a little bit. So this is our homepage, and you'd find the course catalog. There's about 20 courses or so. And I'll pick a random one, maybe, I don't know, statistics or college algebra. This is an algebra class. This is playing.
Have you ever felt like the world of math seems confusing or irrelevant? It can certainly feel that way sometimes, especially if it's explained without any sort of real-world context.
So this is just a regular video, the way a video would look like. Nothing really interesting. But as you enter in, and this is all kind of drawn live from the net right now, what you'll find is that enough people are surfing the web that it's hard to load something. But here's a typical example of, I'm actually in the middle of taking this class.
Thinking about this new definition of an integer and about the other classifications of numbers that we've talked about, please fill out the chart below. Please check off each of the categories.
This actually is a quiz I failed, it turns out. But this is in the very beginning of algebra, where the instructor is teaching things like whole numbers and integers and so on, rational numbers, something I should actually know. And up here you see a little timeline, and each of these dots is a quiz. So each of these videos is basically just a question. Sometimes there's no dot, like over here, and you might actually explain a concept, but it's really rare. And then in these things here, you can actually answer them. This is a complicated one.
So you can see how this diagram that I drew earlier worked.
And a very common use case actually is that the students go straight from quiz to quiz. So rather than watching these videos, they go to the quiz. And if they don't get the quiz, they go back and rewatch the instructions. So the students speak by themselves and say, we love quizzing, we hate instructions. So they go to quizzes. Now, these are quizzes I've done, so they're all answered correctly. Let me pick one I didn't done.
A ton of the numbers that we encounter in daily life are rational numbers, since we can count many things or just...
So I can go to a quiz, and here's a quiz. This is a numerical quiz, okay? If someone can help me. This is 200, I guess. 10 times 10, 10 times 2? Ha. No. Okay. Often I get actually a more detailed analysis of what's going wrong, but 144 plus 64, right? Let me try this one. Right, so there's some random quizzes I can go to if I find myself a little bit rusty and so on. And then I can submit the answer, tell the system I've done it, and then look at what the answer should have been.
If we first take 8 times 8, we get 64.
And this video is 24 seconds long. It's like randomly picked. You pick some other. There's a physics class that became quite popular. That's the one that Time magazine reviewed. And on a shoestring budget, 2 of us flew to Italy and made a nice video. And I don't bore you.
Welcome to Landmarks in Physics. I'm Andy Brown, the instructor for this course. And here we are on location in Syracuse,
So one thing that we can do is with these classes, we can take people at the origins where these discoveries are made. We take them into companies like Google and look at data centers. We take them into self-driving cars. And then we can motivate the problems not based on here's what's typically done in the physics class.
You can go to Google and type, what is the circumference
but you can motivate them with real problems. And this entire unit, the first one is compute the circumference of the planet. And of course, it's very quiz-based.
Before we can answer the question, what years?
So here's a typical quiz that we run with lots of politicians to give them a flavor of what we do, and most of them get it wrong. The entire class, which is relatively long, goes from our way to here, really develops trigonometry and basic physics in the pursuit of measuring how big the planet is using a ruler and a clock and nothing else. And it's actually pretty cool. You learn about sine and cosine because you goddamn want to know how big this planet is, so you can go to your parents and brag about it. That's very different from you learn about factoring polynomials because some mathematician at some point or some state board said this has to be part of the regular curriculum. In fact, as we made our class on factoring polynomials, I had a hard time even explaining to students why they should care about factoring polynomials. And I actually don't know. Maybe if you have an answer, come to me and tell me. But here we kind of sorting the stuff in as you really care about it because you really want to be able to calculate something of interest. And in the very end,
I'm in Syracuse with my assistant,
after the students have calculated their values and submitted them, Andy is back in Syracuse with his good-looking young Italian girl, and he's doing the experiment. And he shows you how he, in Syracuse, where the sun is shining a lot, we need the sun for this, otherwise it doesn't work.
Get some help. Thank you, Roberta.
He's able to calculate how big this planet is.
A weight.
Interestingly enough, we also have a discussion group forum where you can go and check out what's been done in this class. We just reset it, so the numbers right now are very small. But in the original one, we had something that has tens of thousands of kids discussing the same question. And people met there. People did a lot of peer interaction. It typically takes just a few minutes for someone to pose a question and get an answer. So there was a huge social component. In fact, people went to Ecuador to measure the diameter of the planet at the equator, which was a better way to measure it than off the equator, and so on. So it was really interesting what kind of life develops around it. Last thing I want to show, this is a whole class. It's about lightning strikes and lost at sea and keeping Holland dry. This is actually a problem that our European friends like. You can actually do physics based on the idea that you want to keep Holland dry.
We're here in Leiden, in the Netherlands.
So here is in Holland, and you see the canals, and you can see how water level rise by even a meter would sink most of Holland underwater, a good chunk of it. But let me go to the very basics and look into one class. Here's the courses I'm taking. I'm way behind on most of them. And let's look into HTML5, statistics, computer science. This class is taught by the best-looking instructor in the world. But the class was basically an AI class, but we decided to make it a self-driving car class. So many of us care about self-driving cars. I do this in my free time. And I pulled this out because it's one of the examples where the instruction itself...
Just take that same piece of code and modify it to give me a valid probability distribution.
It become not just a quiz in like multiple choice, which is kind of uninspiring, but they become a quiz of the type write software code. And of course, computers are great in grading software, so I can actually put something in here and submit. I guess I got it wrong, and it takes me some while to understand what's going on here. But I could really change this now, and somewhere on Amazon's servers, this is now computed and evaluated and run, and then it's being tested. And in this case, it just gives me incorrect, but when I get it almost correct, I often get a hint as to how to do it better. So the notion of quizzing can be much more powerful than just multiple choice. And it's actually quite amazing how even multiple choice itself is a very powerful instrument if you use it graphically, if on a map you try to find the shortest path and click on the right edges and so on. And don't think of it as a medium to just check whether the student is still awake and listening. If it's a medium to check if the student is still awake and listening, it becomes very dull. But if you make it a technique to really ask insightful questions, it's a very powerful weapon for teaching students. Now, coming back to our commitment, now we have a number of activities underway. We're working obviously in the gateway level. We're working with corporations. But my true commitment, my true passion is pedagogy. And I'm the very first to admit we're not there yet, not even remotely. But I have this deep belief, just like cinematography and later on video games have transformed the watching experience of something artificial, like storytelling, graphical storytelling, theater. I believe the online world will arrive at something very, very different from the way it is today. And we have to borrow our metaphors from areas outside education to make progress. We can't just go and say, sage on the stage, record yourself. I think it's just not good enough, and it's not inspirational for me. So we care a lot about pedagogy. We use research tools, data-driven tools to improve pedagogy. So rather than use digital media to replicate in-class experiences, which I would fault many attempts to do online education to actually do, not all, define a new learning experience specifically for the digital media that exploits the fact that it can be quiz-driven. And here's my personal motivator, and you can debate it and you can reject it, but it's certainly true for me. This is a little video game called Angry Birds, which, anyone here played Angry Birds before? Okay. Okay, let me do the thorny question. Anyone done more than 5 hours of Angry Birds in the last month? Good, thank you. Anyone done more Angry Birds in the last year than in algebra? Okay, assume if I actually go down the list of games, I'll catch most of you. The interesting thing about Angry Birds is, and it's really a wonderful thing to think about, it actually is a fantastic learning environment with some flaws, okay? It teaches you something, it teaches you physics, it lets you experience physics, and you walk away with an understanding how birds and slingshots interoperate and kill pigs, okay? Now, you might argue killing pigs with birds is not exactly the best way of physics, and that's its flaw. Its flaw is it stops with like killing pigs with slingshots. If it moved on and it became a programming engine where you could actually program your own physics engine and really taught you how to understand the physical world and the equation of physics by playing with them, it could be the world's most amazing learning engine. Now, Angry Birds is free of lectures, and it's all about student interaction. So we want to get to the point, I want to get to the point where interacting with the medium is as much fun as playing a video game. So I don't need any grades anymore for students. I need nothing. They're just like, you start playing it, and you get sucked into it. In fact, one of the biggest compliments I got from my wife recently, who's a professor in English, and she, for a presentation, went into our physics class and didn't come back for 5 hours and said, oh my God, 5 hours went by, and I got sucked into it. For me, these are the highlights of our work, where people learn because they wish to learn, and they feel this constant positive reinforcement when they master a challenge. Video games of this type have a few ingredients. You work as a student, not the professor. Okay? The professor is behind the curtain designing the video game. You get a curated sequence of challenges that become more and more difficult over time, and you get instant positive feedback on your performance. So when you go to bed and have played Angry Birds, you say, wow, I'm really good, I made this level. And that's an experience that our students almost never get, right? For us, exams are fearful. At the end of the semester, they're timed. You don't give them the time that it takes. They come back 2 weeks later. And just this little thing that they come back 2 weeks later and you don't get a second chance, that in itself is really, really frustrating to me, because it means your context in which you did your performance is now dissolved from the context when you get the feedback. And in many cases, you have 2 weeks of fear, right? What if Angry Bird came back 2 weeks later and said, you mastered the level? You would never play it again, right? So I think this is a good world to look at to understand what we should be doing. So I was quoting Amanda Ripley, and I just want to briefly look at the second part of this quote here. She took a whole bunch of MOOCs. And what I loved about her article, and I didn't pay her for this, and obviously it's just one opinion, there's many other also negative opinions about us, is what surprised me is the way that the class was taught. It was designed according to how the brain actually learns. In other words, it had almost nothing in common with most classes I've taken before. And that was the point. I was like, my God, someone is getting it. That's where I want to get to. And I can't tell you I figured it out. And many of you have done amazing work in education. But I think that we as a field should aspire to use the digital media to its fullest advantage, whatever it takes. Just like our various other companies, I think Newton is the leading company in that space, in my opinion. We do a lot of work on data-driven assessment. The fact that these classes are online gives us a tremendous wealth of data about the students, but also about the class itself. So we do a lot of work on A/B testing, where we toss out 2 different versions of something, and then observe which one works better. In a regular class, it's almost impossible to do. There's places called schools of education that do this, usually in K through 12, and typically takes a PhD thesis to come up with a conclusion about an experiment. And then because it's a PhD thesis, no one reads it, at least outside the education circles. I mean, I professor at Stanford, never read a single paper how to be a teacher. It's kind of sad, but it's true. Certainly not own studies, and I wasn't open to running studies in my own classroom. But it's impossible to run these studies because I might change something, and then there's some effect, but a year later, I do something differently, but there's so many confounding variables that might destroy my result. I mean, and I can only test 2, 3, 4, 10 bits a year, right? Whereas now I can test a bit in a few minutes. There's always a few hundred students online, and you have immediate data feedback. That in itself, I think, will turn education into research. And it's really important to realize this means your class is never done. Class is a living animal. So don't think about making a class and then putting it online. You put something online that's mediocre, but you get all the data back, and you can make it better over time. And we've massively done this at Udacity to really exchange bits and pieces, improve them, and so on. There's modes of adaptive online learning that we don't do yet, and some we do, but I inspire to do more of. And I really would love to see all of us doing a lot of it. In fact, many of you are. Self-paced learning, I talked about, Al-Salman Khan. Adaptive learning, finding individual learning paths for learners. We do a fairly poor job right now at Udacity. That's something I'd like to improve. Our students love projects, learning as needed, as opposed to learning proactively. I think the entire notion that education must be proactive in life is questionable, and certainly not backed by the data anymore. And then multidimensional assessment. One thing that we find is that assessment is actually more dimensional than the classical educational setup would provide. In my Stanford classes, I measure academic performance, which is test performance, right? So quizzes. How good can they calculate numbers, prove a theorem? And that's it. Set 2. In the online world, I can measure completely different things. And we are measuring different things. We can measure soft skills, like how well does a student help others? In our discussion forums, it's completely obvious. Every class has a few dozen students who are just amazingly good. And those are the ones that the employers like over those that are really great academically. In fact, those are the ones we hire, the students who help others. And the reason is, I mean, inside academia, we don't collaborate much as students. In fact, we're so obsessed with individual assessment, we call collaboration in many cases cheating, right? Whereas, I mean, cheating is a good thing if you help each other, in my opinion. We just don't like it as educators because it makes it hard for us to assess students individually. In the workplace, no problem ever gets solved without 20, 30, 50 people. It's unheard of, right? You have lawyers, you have business people, you have engineers, you have product, you have marketing, right? You have sales. And all these people have to work together to solve a problem, whatever problem you're trying to solve. So there's a huge gap in the way we assess students in the academic setting and what assessment would be useful for hiring decisions. We recently also looked into the biggest drawback of MOOCs, which is the enormous dropout rates. MOOCs graduate as few as 3% of people sometimes in some cases. More common is 8, 10%. Certainly almost unheard of would be 25, 30%. And while these numbers are to be taken with a grain of salt, it's really easy to sign up. You don't pay money, right? You just, there's a deep problem with this as well. So one of the things we're doing right now in some of the MOOC for credits that we offer, we actually staff those with mentors and online hotline 24/7. And we've gotten significantly better rates of retention. This is an ongoing study funded by National Science Foundation that we're doing right now locally in California. But the hope is to find ways to keep students engaged. There's actually nothing new here for online educators. It's known that you have to call your students regularly to stay engaged. We're kind of rediscovering this, so I don't want to take credit for any of this. But we certainly have a concern to also bring up retention rates. I want to, in closing, before I open the next 10 minutes for discussion, give a brief outlook on, I think, a broader perspective of where I think higher education has to go and should be going. And that has to do with the organization of life. Somewhat simplified speaking, our lives are organized in 4 phases. We have a play phase that lasts the first 5 years. In fact, my son is just about to emerge into the second phase, the educate phase, where the predominant part of your life is actually spent learning, being educated. usually the way to enter college or your associate degree. Then you enter the workforce and you work. You tend not to educate yourself anymore in most cases. And assume present company is an exception, but most Americans work hard and educate little. And then there's the retirement phase before you pass away. Now, this picture to me has all kinds of problems. It's not utilizing technology very well in that we have educational resources that could be with us for an entire life, but it's also not reflective of how society works nowadays. In a time before the industrial age, where between the time you were born and the time you died, not much changed, and you might as well tell you in the beginning of life, and where the things to know were small, where there weren't that many disciplines and that many dissertations, it was fine to say, learn something, and then you can leverage what you've learned for the rest of your life. In fact, at those days, you had one job in your lifetime, and it tended to be the same job as your father had. Right? So I've met people in Germany that work for Volkswagen, and they pride themselves as the fifth-generation person working for Volkswagen. Okay? That's not true anymore. Today, the society is moving at an increasing pace. The pace itself is increasing. In my own field, computer science, it takes about 5 to 10 years for everything to turn over. Everything that is relevant in computer science today wasn't there 10 years ago. All the programming languages, all the computer systems, all the applications, mobile and so on, didn't exist 10 years ago, right? And that means there's a continuing need for education throughout your life. Secondly, people don't hold one job anymore. We hold 5, 6, 7 jobs over our lifetime. And these jobs are different. And as a result, we have a continual need to educate ourselves. So what I believe has to happen is a fundamental restructuring of how we think about education. It's not an economic crisis, it's not a pedagogy crisis, it's a crisis about how we mix life and education into life. And if we get this right, our market will be much, much larger, not smaller, because we can actually educate many more people. Right now, if you're in a college and you graduate, you go to commencement, and then your provider, your education provider, says, that's it, the end. No other provider does this. Like my cable company never says, they're done. No, my medical company might say this for different reasons. But by and large, every other service company in education as a service sector is willing to service me for the rest of my life, except for my education company. I also believe with a prolonged educational phase, which should be lifelong, should be an earlier onset of work. I mean, I'm against child labor, but I think getting high school kids involved in what your career could look like and understand how to choose the educational topics is a useful thing to do. Way too often kids go to college having no clue about something. Some professor telling them you have to take the following chemistry class and the following English class, and when they come out they realize, oh my God, this was really irrelevant. Yeah? And we're doing, by and large, I think, not a good job curating our educational content to really match what's needed in the workforce and the lives of those students. You can certainly challenge me in the question and answer session and say, that's insulting, Sebastian, but I think we should be honest about it. We have curricula that are really outdated in many ways, such as factoring polynomials. Over breakfast, we talked about this. I tried to make a class that included factoring polynomials because we teach in college algebra, so it's part of it. And I could not think of a single opportunity in my own life where I factored a polynomial. Yes, I had to still teach our kids how to factor polynomials. Right? So this is my final slide, and I really love to see a discussion on this, and I hopefully can give you some thoughts going forward. I don't have the answers. I think it's something we have to do together. You all make amazing contributions to education. You've passionately devoted your life to education. I think of it as a challenge. Let's bring education into the 21st century. Let's bring education where Twitter is, and Gmail is, and computer games are, and where the world is today, and make use of technology and really fundamentally think through the basic concepts of education. That's what I'm trying to do. Thank you. So I think we have some time for Q&A.
So what would, like a traditional school of education right now, what would that look like if you could go in and wave your magic wand and do whatever you wanted to do? What would it look like on a day-to-day basis and for students and professors?
So question, how would, if I could, my magic wand. This is the point where my answers become very weak. And if I'm really honest, I can only tell you I don't know. But I have some ideas. I personally learned almost everything that I've learned by taking on projects like running a startup company or inventing the next generation of mobile computer or building a self-driving car. And I entered this field of inventing a, I don't know, computer with battery supply and display and all this stuff without any knowledge on hardware, on optics, or human-computer interaction. And I ran this team together with Babak Puppets for years. And I taught myself along the way. I very deeply believe that for me, education experiences are positive when I'm motivated. And I get motivated by solving problems. And it might be that I want to reach the candy jar in the top drawer, which my son tries to do, and builds towers of chairs to get there. Or it might be that I want to build a successful startup company or change all of transportation, that I get in and then educate myself. If I think about what's the biggest revolution in education, it's actually not Udacity, in my opinion, or Coursera or edX or any of us. It's actually Google, in the sense that an increasing number of people just go to Google when they need to know something, and the associated websites like Wikipedia and so on. I think the mode of education, to me, if we were to design an environment, as a result, would be very much driven by individual challenges and put that back into the loop. That's where I think almost all math education fails. Because in math education, someone comes to you and says, here's a third-degree polynomial. And then most kids say, my God, why do I care about third degree polynomial? And honestly, I mean, anyone care about third degree? I wouldn't know. So bringing this back in, I mean, this is obviously happening across the nation in many schools. I'm a little bit concerned about this strong shift towards standardized tests, because I think they have the opposite effect. They just teach skills for the tests in some sense. Yeah. I would love to have more money for teachers. I'd love to be more economical with this. I would love to see, analyze what fraction of the teaching experience can be automated. It is kind of irresponsible for me to have 10,000 or whatever history classes across the nation at the same time, to the extent they do the same thing, right? To the extent that I give my AI class lecture every year exactly the same lecture. In fact, at Stanford, there was a professor teaching so many students he wouldn't fit in one class. So he gave the same lecture twice the same week. This is like a complete waste, right? So if we can get that waste out and then replace the teacher interaction in a more meaningful individual way, I think education would be so much stronger. But that would require some radical rethinking about curriculum, about design, about technology. I'd love the educational field stop being against technology and be for technology, because I think it can help them. It can make things better. So there's a whole bunch of things that I would love to see.
I believe Keith Devlin, who you guys probably know from Stanford, said that MOOCs, the way they're currently designed, aren't necessarily appropriate for high school level students. What do you think what are the implications for high schools in moving in this direction?
I think this is a tricky statement to make. And first of all, obviously, there's not a single answer, like are suitable or are not suitable. We actually tested our MOOCs, statistics and physics MOOCs, in a high school, a charter school in Texas recently. This is a charter school that only accepts kids that got kicked out of other schools because of failing grades. So they're all at-risk children. And we found that out of 24 testing subjects, all 17 years old, 2 of them were able to finish a undergraduate level college class in 2 weeks, as opposed to a semester. And they knew the stuff afterwards, statistics and physics. And it was really moving to see this. And we talked to these girls, both girls, one of color, one white, and they both had been kicked out of their school and were at risk for many, many years, below the 70% mark. And it turned out they were plenty smart. Just didn't fit into the context. The social context and fabric of a classroom wasn't right for them. And we know there's a lot of kids right now that are plenty smart that don't succeed in the school system. I think the better perspective is before anybody goes and says good or bad for, let's be humble, and let's study it, and let's try it, and be experimental. And let's also be open towards saying, well, it might not be good for the majority of kids, but it's good for a minority of kids. So right now we're running a high school pilot together with San Jose State, where we have 3 classes in high schools, a remedial math class, college algebra class, and a much more advanced statistics class. It turns out the data so far suggests statistics is the best. So there's no surprise. This has been taken by highly motivated students who want to improve their college admissions chances. Remedial does the worst, but it's still doing significantly better than, the students so far doing significantly better than in regular classes. So I think there's something to be explored. I'm the very first one to say that the MOOC concept, the way it's done today, is probably faulty. It'd be kind of crazy that some random guy randomly records a video on a piece of paper and gets it right. But what I see right now is an amazing set of individual successes, like this 11-year-old Pakistani girl, which is not in high school, it's middle school, now mastering lots of Udacity classes and loving them and really striving under them and building up a vision that she wants to be a physics professor as a result. That I think is way too premature to make these kind of summative statements. Yeah.
Hello, and thank you for your talk. How do you account, and you just started to get there, for quality and accountability for people that want to take the courses, because not everybody can be Coursera or Udacity and have that high level of self-reflection to make sure that it's actually at a high level. So when everything else starts popping up, what can we do to make sure that everything meets your standard?
Yeah, I mean, it's not my standards, it's your standards, right? It's everyone's standards. The number one thing, obviously, is to be open-minded, right? It is fine to run experiments. Of course, I don't want to screw up a generation of high school kids with my experiments, but there's ways to run experiments that is fine, like, for example, over the summer, when they otherwise would watch television. Some of them would. The second thing is just be rigorous about outcome analysis, right? And really study it. There's been a study done by Cornell about the Carnegie Mellon class statistics at multiple colleges, and the result was the outcome was the same as a regular class at something like 70% of the total time spent. So it was more effective as a learning mechanism, which is good. So in total, it was actually better than a regular class. And compare. I mean, if anybody, as an educator here, comes up to me and says, yes, we already found the perfect solution, we're doing it perfectly right now, then come up to me and tell me. I must have missed it. I think there's a lot of deficiencies in today's systems as well. We don't do a good job measuring our systems today either, especially not at the higher ed level, where there's no school ranking that looks at the value added by schools. There's only school ranking based on number of Nobel laureates and stuff like this. I think we should be much more rigorous with ourselves, and we should be more honest to ourselves. It's interesting how most higher ed departments of schools of education focus on K through 12 and not on themselves. I think we just brutally go to ourselves and see what our results are. And I can tell you, my class at Stanford, by going to this new medium, the performance level went up by a full letter grade, which is really significant. And I was shocked because I thought I was a good teacher. And I wasn't.
Thank you for your chat. It's inspirational. How much are your glasses and where can I get them?
If you chop off this head. No. Those will launch pretty soon. These are fully functional. I didn't come here to talk about them, but I wear them quite a bit. I can take a picture of you and send it to my friends. There you go. They're coming out as a developer model. Google has announced this sometime this spring. I'll defer any detailed question to my Google friends. But they're fun to wear, and they certainly get your attention. Yeah.
Thank you, Sebastian, and Andrew's talk this morning. They were both so inspirational, and as a teacher, I just applaud what you're doing. And I guess I'm going to cover what school I'm from and ask you, how do I go back to my higher level education college and say, this is a good thing, and they say to me, but there's no money in it. What can you help me as far as how can I convince my school or other schools that this is worth the investment because it will, I don't know, maybe it'll lead to more matriculated students. I'm not sure, but I just really find right now that we have a lot of resistance, and it's usually the budget. So do you have anything you can share with me on that?
So one of the nice things about what we're doing is we've drastically cut the cost of the medium, right? I mean, it's one thing happening here is this is, I mean, really, really cheap. And as a result, we can reach many students. In fact, we've gone overboard in giving away education for free as a result, because we figured it's like $1 a student, so we might as well make it free, which is not necessarily the right move. But the question of how to engage your school back home is really depend on what type of engagement you want. Do you want to be an educator on this medium? That's a fantastic thing to do, and I'll tell you in a second how to do it. Or do you care about the students? In all likelihood, we will open up our platform this summer to any student, high school student in the nation, to get advanced college credit. And by doing this in areas like computer science and others, including the classes we're offering right now. And by doing this, we will help students to use the summer to place themselves better in college and also collect transferable college credit from the CSU system, but it's kind of nationwide transferable, so that they don't have to spend as much time in college. We really hope to put a dent into the 58% failure rate of students entering the California college system and going straight into remedial. We hope those students to be able to test out of remedial while still at high school. So there's a clear benefit to them. And while there's a cost associated, the cost is much, much, much lower than the cost would be of hiring an instructor doing the same thing. So it's $150. So one very easy way to participate is like set these media out there and use them. And universities are beginning to do this in schools. Lots of schools are using our current courses and offering school credit and say there's a physics class, it looks like a great physics class, take it and you get credit, and the instructor now becomes someone who coaches you. And the effect of that is that an instructor who might not be a great, say, computer science instructor in the most modern technology now can teach something in a very modern technology and still be there for the students and help them. So there's many different ways of engaging. For the last one, how to do it yourself, I just want to tell the story of my wife. She's an educator in English, and we argue a lot. I'm a technologist. She isn't as much as I am, as you can tell. And she recently said, look, I want to go online. And I said, well, my tools aren't quite ready for you yet, so please wait. And then she said, no, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to use WordPress and Twitter. And she made this literature class about Oscar Wilde and Victorian literature. And she made a role play where people reenacted roles on Twitter for these characters. And it was tremendous fun. And like newspaper articles came out about it, how this role play emerged. There were like, I don't know, 80 or 90 countries involved. And all of a sudden, you had this community of people playing Oscar Wilde and the various traditional figures reenacting this, right? It's kind of nothing. I mean, the most interesting stuff is the stuff you don't expect. And I would submit pretty much everybody should be able to go to Twitter and use Twitter. It's actually not that hard to use. WordPress is a little bit harder to use. But even among the people who teach English literature, like my wife, who are technophiles, they're able to pick these things up and be creative about it. And I found this really amazing because, I mean, this is an era of experimentation. Anybody who comes to you and says, we have the solution, like send them out, because they don't, myself included. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to innovate. I'm trying to experiment. And the only way to drive it forward is to experiment. Every time someone ridicules us or somebody else and writes these long articles, I just scratch my head and say, well, you have two choices to spend your time. You can critique, or you can do it yourself. And I want to be in the do-it-yourself side. I'm on the critique side, because that's the only way to drive society forward. So if you find somebody who like ridicules us or somebody else and writes long articles, tell them to shut up, because it's not a good use of time. If they're thoughtful and so on, that's a different story. But if it's just about having an opinion, I think it's much better to go out, experiment, try out, see what works, and then honestly report on the findings, good or bad. Yeah.
Thank you. I've enjoyed your talk, but I work in the area of special needs, and I wondered, has there been any ongoing studies with, like, say, students' attention deficit in the online learning?
Yeah, so I'm the wrong person to ask. And I mean, it isn't blatantly obvious. I'm actually not an online learning expert the way many of you are. I used to be a robotics expert and a Google guy. I'm not aware of any studies with these specific MOOCs in the special needs area. And my hunch, if I had one, is that I think from what I know about special needs, and you know better, is that the human element is even more prevalent in this population group. And I find it harder to believe that you could replace a human with a computer in that, or augment a teacher easily. However, having said this, I've seen a lot of work in pre-K that uses computer technology to teach kids how to write and how to speak and how to do math. And I'm quite amazed and quite blown away by it. My 5-year-old son is a computer expert. I mean, he was able to use an iPad before he was able to flip a page in a magazine. And he loves the iPad, and he loves my phone to the detriment of my phone. He blows into it and all kinds of stuff. But behind this, I think there's actually a growing number of activities in the pre-KK area that I've seen that really invent new ways of engaging kids and tying together video games together with meaningful learning of meaningful things, like how to write and how to spell and how to read words and so on. So I bet there's a lot of stuff out there. I'm sure some people in the room might know a lot about it. The lady is back there. See her? Because it's obviously a field that's very, very broad and very rich. Well, thank you so much.